is investigation. The second column is notification. So if you find out you've got a problem and you need to notify. And then the third column, in decreasing likelihood of being used, is if you get sued as a result. So essentially, when you notify people that you've had a problem, some people, including a regulator, may sue you. So the good thing about the cover is that there are 3 columns and you get individual limits for each of those 3 columns. So you can use up the first one of investigation and you've still got a separate tower for notification. And if you notified everyone, you use all that up, then you get a third column, which is the liability cover, and that is intact as well. The final thing to say about the cover, we'll go through each column in a little bit more detail when we go through claims examples, is that they stack as well. So if you run out of money for investigation and your liability limit is still intact, then you can borrow from that column. So in this example, random set of limits, there's one column for £500,000 for the investigation. The second column is expressed as a number of people, and so rather than having to work out how much money it is to notify 25,000 people or 1 million people, we just say we'll pay for the costs of notifying that many people, and you don't have to guess how much it will cost. And then finally, there's the liability column. So if you normally bought an insurance cover, this might be described as £500,000 of cover, as it would be with the other wordings. But with this one, it's actually £500,000 plus £500,000 plus the cost of notifying 25,000 people. So that's a quick introduction to the cover.
Has joined the meeting.
Use some examples of claims to kind of give you further examples of how the coverage works. The thing to recognise, those first 2 columns are services, essentially. So you get access to people that do that for you. It's like outsourcing. You buy a plan for the first 2 columns of coverage. And the third one is more of a traditional risk transfer insurance where we pay out money. We pay for all the costs in the first 2 columns, but we also do the work for you. So I'll talk a little bit about the appetite and a little bit about how we transact. So good thing is there are no classes that we don't write, and so it's quite difficult to know exactly what generates interest in cyber in every single segment that a business can do. But from an appetite perspective, we have a genuine appetite for even the more difficult classes. And in the more difficult classes, we would include financial institutions, healthcare, NHS, public sector, retailers, some of which are online, and education establishments. These are fairly unusual classes for people to be enthusiastic about, but we have a genuine appetite for these, and so that can be quite useful. We think that one of the problems with cyber has been that it's been unaffordable for most SMEs because the introductory premiums are so high. They vary a lot at the moment, but traditionally they've been up to £1,000 as a minimum, and so the fact that we can make this cover available for £109 means that even very small companies, clubs, associations, small manufacturers hopefully can afford that. The other problem with cyber is that it's generally considered to be too expensive and or very difficult to transact. And so the good news is, in order for us to provide an indication, all we need is the activity and the revenue. So if you have an existing relationship with a client and you want to add cyber on, then hopefully you will already have those 2 pieces of information, and that we can indicate for any risks off the back of activity and revenue. And then we actually indicate off of that without asking any further questions. So that's really important. You don't have to fill in a long proposal form in order to get a quote. You can just send us the activity and revenue and we'll provide a quote. In order to bind it, we don't ask any technical questions. So some cyber proposal forms ask about less familiar things like encryption. Do you keep your patches up to date? Do you use this piece of technical equipment or that? Basically, our technical questions are as simple as, have you had any claims or incidents? And what amount of transactions do you do online or with credit cards? So neither of those prevent you getting a quote. The answer, if you've had claims or if you do loads of online transactions, it just means that we take another look at the premium. But Matt
has left the meeting.
Are you there, Matthew?
Hello. Matthew, are you there?
I think Matthew's audio's gone.
Ah.
Yeah, apologies, everybody. If I could run through, if I knew anything about underwriting and cyber, I could probably take it from here, guys. But as you know, as you all know, I've got my limitations.
that must be answered.
Look, don't start queuing up to laugh at me. I know you all want to.
It's your fault, Alistair.
Yeah, it always is. It always is. To be fair, I've only just logged on, so quite clearly what's happened is I've taken the extra bandwidth that's needed to continue things. And yes, you're right, Don. You're lucky you don't have a mic. I'm not sure Matthew's actually realised we're in the position we're in.
I don't think he is.
I'll drop her an email.
Right.
Right, so what does everyone think about Brexit while we're here, yeah? Anyway, let's not go there.
Really?
I'm still very happy to have my Kiwi passport, so I'll be alright.
Yeah.
You know we take you back.
Right. Matthew's just saying he's redialing in. Don doesn't count as CPD, mate, if you haven't actually done it. Don't worry about cheating the FCA and the CII. You're cheating yourself, okay? Don's always looking for cheap points.
Don't blame him, don't worry.
Well, there's always the Aviva Dev Zone. I'm sure you're right on top of that, Phil.
Oh, yeah, some. I've heard of it.
How's it been? I've missed the first couple of minutes, unfortunately. Has it been useful?
I missed the first 3 minutes because I was struggling with dialing at all. And I seem to, the slides seem to have disappeared as well now.
Everyone loves a technical difficulty, don't they?
Yeah. That's really nice for you.
Matthew's still actually on from the web.
Has joined the meeting.
Is that clearer? Sorry, I don't know quite what happened.
That's all right, Matthew. Not a problem. Have you got your slides back up on the screen?
Yeah, just pop them back up.
Yeah, excellent.
Can you see them? Sorry about that. Not quite sure what happened. So when did it cut out? What slide point did it cut out?
Jump back a couple, I'll show you. But just prove that I'm listening. Go back one more.
That's it.
I think we're there, yeah. Right. Can everyone just do me a quick favour? Thanks, Matt, for getting that sorted out. Can you all just go back on mute? There was quite a bit of background noise before Matt cut out. All right, over to you, Matt.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. So in terms of the appetite, here are 4 areas where often it can be considered quite difficult, but we have a very wide appetite, and even these difficult classes, such as financial institutions, healthcare, NHS trusts, retailers, whether they're kind of online or normal offline retailers, or education, schools, universities. They're all tricky areas, but we have a genuine appetite for all of them. And part of the accessibility is about making it affordable for small companies. And so, if you're a 150,000 club or association, then a minimum premium might be £109, which hopefully might make it affordable even for the tiny guys. And we do think this is almost like buying a plan in a way. So if you do have a problem, you won't know quite what to do with a cyber incident, then actually getting a plan for £109 seems quite, it's certainly the most cost-effective way of getting a plan.
Has left the meeting.
So it's super easy to transact. We think that sometimes people are put off by the fact that you have to answer lots of questions, technical questions, before you get a quote. So all you need is the activity and the revenue in order to get an indication of terms. And hopefully, if you already have a relationship with a client, you might already have that information. So no questions in order to get a quote, just the activity and the revenue. And then in order to bind that quote, we don't ask any tricky questions. What we found is some of the questions that used to be asked for cyber were not understood by the people that were trying to buy it, and even if they did understand them, such as, are your patches all up to date? The answer would often be no. So we've scrapped the technical questions. Basically, we check what level of online transactions you have, and we ask for a claim statement. So a simple statement of fact with no technical questions, so that once people have seen a price, hopefully it'll be a little lower than they expect, then the information that they need in order to bind that is something which is a couple of simple questions about whether you've had claims and what level of online transactions you do. Even if you have had claims, it's very normal for us to quote the same terms, because if you've had a claim, often you're actually a bit more aware of what your issues are, and you're less likely to have them the second time around. So that's a quick run through about hopefully how easy it is to get a quote, and that the appetite's quite wide. And we'll come back to some claims examples to explain the service and the cover in just a moment. But we think there are a few misconceptions about cyber, probably led by the fact that it's called cyber, which is not the best name in the world, because what it really suggests is that it's all about digital stuff. It's all about stuff online. And so the lady on the left is who gets the press. It's all about antivirus software and whizzy things like that. Whereas actually the guy on the right, Dave, there's a bit of Dave in me. There might be a bit of Dave in many people. What we see each year, a quarter of all the problems we have are missent emails. So email with personal information as an attachment sent to the wrong people, or paper put in the recycling rather than the shredding bin, or a laptop left on the train, or someone clicking on a virus. All of these are human error, and in our experience, the majority of the problems are caused by humans, and the majority of the problems aren't solved by technology. We think it's slightly easier to talk about human error as being an exposure, because if a technical conversation can often be disengaging, but it also implies that you haven't got your stuff sorted out. And so we prefer to talk about how easy it is for any of us to make an inadvertent mistake, and that feels a slightly less threatening way of describing what someone's cyber exposure is. Put into a few words, human error is often what causes a cyber risk, but it's definitely paper as well as data. So each year we see filing cabinets passed to people, and there's some paper stuff down the back which are printouts of personal information. or folders left in cars and the cars getting stolen. And so there's plenty of paper as well as data which is at risk. If you lose a piece of paper with personal information on or corporate information, it's a similar exposure to if it's online. And then one of the other misconceptions is people often say, why would people target me? Why would someone have it in for me? Well, a lot of these problems that I've just described, like missending an email, it's not about malice and it's not about someone targeting you. It's just inadvertent. And an awful lot of data breaches arise because someone made an honest mistake. It's unfortunate, but certainly not malicious. And there's no thought of targeting someone. Even if you're unlucky enough to get a hacker to target you, initially they won't know who you are. They'll download a little bit of software off the internet and they'll send it out like a direct mailing.
Has joined the meeting.
The direct mailing is a good analogy in a way because they don't know who you are, they don't know what you do, they don't know what size you are, and they don't even know what country you're in. They'll just send out these emails and then hope for someone to click on them. And once you click on them, then they start understanding who you are and making an assessment about whether they attack you. But that initial stage is definitely non-targeted. It's free software. Young kids can use it quite easily. And an example in just a moment is about a small foundry in Lancashire who got targeted. No one targeted a foundry by by intention. They just sent out the emails. The foundry unfortunately clicked on them, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened to them later on. Insiders and outsiders can be involved. Both insiders and outsiders can be malicious or non-malicious. Most problems are caused by insiders inadvertently causing a problem. But sometimes hackers target insiders to make them do things by mistake. And one of the most popular problems at the moment is you get false invoices, and they target an insider who might be a low-level employee who's in a bit of a hurry. It's a Friday afternoon, and they pay the invoice, and the little link to the bank account, unfortunately, is not your true supplier, but a criminal, and so the money whizzes off to a criminal's account rather than who you think it should end up with. And so that's a good combination of insider and outsider. And the final thing, if you imagine a small media consultant doing the John Lewis advertising campaign over Christmas, often they'll target the media consultant not to get the data or information that the media consultant has, but to get into John Lewis. And so it's not your data, the insured's data, but it's the data of your client. It's a bit like trying to get in through the tradesman's entrance rather than the front door. And hackers call this trusted third-party attacks, which shows that it's a thing, that hackers often think, if I want to get into John Lewis, if I try to go through their website, that will have really good security. But if they allow one of their suppliers special access to the network, I might try to crack their security and get into John Lewis that way. One of the biggest data losses ever was basically targeting a heating and ventilation engineer for a big office complex, and they got in through essentially the plumber, and the retailer had 130 million credit cards stolen as a result. So they view it as a way of trying to get into a more important network through the back door. So cyber risks are quite wide, and these are some of the stats that we pull up. So if you look at the dark blue 24%, that 24% is basically missent emails, inadvertent disclosure. So, something like 1 in 4 events that we handle are about that kind of human error of just sending an email out to the wrong person. Of course, 10 years ago, sending an email out would unlikely have any important information, but these days when we send emails, there's an awful lot more information potentially attached to them. So the likelihood of a missent email actually having implications is a bit higher. And on the, each year there are 8% of the incidents that we have are lost tablets or laptops with important information on. That 40% is quite high. That's like hackers, but often the 40% arises from someone's inadvertent human error, like clicking on an email. The last one that I'll mention is the 12% one. A lot of people say we don't need cyber because we outsource, we put our computers in the cloud and stuff like that. 12% all the incidents we handle are caused by the outsourcers. It's not always their fault, but it is normally their responsibility. And unfortunately, it's a good thing to often outsource, but your contract with the outsourcers will often not make them financially responsible if they cause a problem. So when people say to us, we outsource, we don't need cyber, often our reply is, well, in our experience, if you outsource, it's a good reason to buy cyber, because if they do cause a problem, which 12% of the time they do in our experience, they won't have a contract which makes you good at the end of it. So these are all UK incidents. They're typically small companies. These are not US incidents, and they're all our direct experience. We've handled about 12,000 data breaches incidents. We average about 10 a day. Quite a lot of them are in the US, but the frequency is incredibly high, and each month it goes by, it gets a little bit higher. So we think it's probably not true to say there are more data breaches, but there are more people that notice data breaches and contact us to try to deal with them. So GDPR, not generally perhaps a very engaging subject. There's just one small element of GDPR I want to mention to you today, and this is for any business at all, big or small, and that is that if you have a data breach, then without undue delay, you've got to let the regulator know within 72 hours. So forget the fines for a moment. If you don't notify the regulator after you're aware within 72 hours, and by notify, this is the chapter and verse that you need to tell them, then the regulator will start taking a keen interest in you. And in practice, what that means is there's a good chance they will distract you from doing your business. And so unless you've got a plan in place before the data breach, there's basically no practical chance that you'll better comply with what the GDPR tells you. It doesn't matter so much if you've got a plan and after 72 hours you don't know everything about what's gone on. As long as you can convince the regulator you're working hard and searching hard, then you'll be in good shape. But if you haven't even started investigating, then that's a real issue, and they will start making a lot of requests of you. Our rough rule of thumb is that if you're brilliantly organized and you don't have a plan, it will probably take you a minimum of 10 days to get a plan, and so that would mean you were 7 days over the stipulation. And so it's really important that you have some sort of plan before you have a data breach. And I guess the case that we're trying to make is that this insurance could constitute a plan. So I'll go through a few breach examples that are most common, 3 really. One is ransomware. So ransomware, very, very common attack, is basically you'll get an email on a Monday morning and it will say, sorry, you can't get into your computer network anymore, pay me some money or you'll not be able to get into your computer network. So in that situation, the first thing to do is to close down the network to make sure the infection, this virus that they put into your network, stops spreading. And then the second thing is to figure out what kind of backup you've got. So rather than pay the ransom, paying the ransom is normally a bad plan. I'll come back to that in a moment. If you don't pay the ransom, then you want to find out whether you've got backup immediately available. If you have, you've still got to check that the backup itself is not infected, and you've got to make sure your own network isn't infected when you apply the backup. What that means in a nutshell is it normally takes between about 3 and 7 days to get the system back up and running, even if the backup is immediately to hand. Because if you'll compound your issue if you put your backup into an infected system. And during that time, depending on what exactly the business is, then you'll probably, you might lose some revenue. It might impact on your revenue. So this kind of insurance policy will investigate whether your insurance network, your computer network has been infected, try to make sure it's not infected anymore, check where the backup is, apply the backup. And if you lose, that's all like cost, reconstitution of data. And then finally, if you have lost some revenue, then we'll pay for the loss of revenue as well. The problem with paying the ransom, there are several things. One is so many people are doing ransomware attacks now. The idea if you pay the ransom is you get a key to unlock your network. Well, they're not trying to supply you the wrong key, but in our experience in the last 2 years, 50% of the time, if you pay for the key you get sent doesn't work. So it's not a good business plan for them to send you the wrong key, but they've got so many attacks going on that they'll just pull the wrong key down. They want to send you the right key, but they send you the wrong key. So that's obviously a problem because you've wasted time waiting to get your network back, which could have been spent doing it yourself or having a plan to do it. Second thing, if you pay, is it's very usual that you'll get a second request shortly afterwards, either from the same person or from one of their friends, because you'll be marked as a payer, and many people don't pay. So if you are a payer, then you might get further requests. And then thirdly, I guess the main problem in this situation is if you do pay the money, where you pay the money to often gets shut down by the police. So you could pay the money, but the person isn't there anymore. It's almost like someone selling watches on a street corner. They get moved on quite regularly. So if you pay the money, you still might not get any key. So that's that in a nutshell, and we'll supply the slides for you to look at. But it's essentially saying you get a service for someone to help reconstitute your data, and you get paid for a lot of revenue, and you also get your network investigated to check for infections. Fraudulent transfer, that's cyber crime or social engineering. I mentioned about the fraudulent invoices earlier. Essentially, someone tricks you into transferring funds to who you think is the right person, your CEO or a supplier or a client, and actually it turns out that it's someone impersonating them. So similar to the last slide, the question set is essentially, in order to send you the funds, the request for the funds, did they have access to your network? So there was one lady that got a request to pay £20,000 from her CEO. She rang up the CEO. He was a bit snippy. He said, yeah, it's me, just pay it, crack on. 5 days later, she got a second request for £9,500. She thought she wouldn't ring him back this time. It was a hacker this time, and she sent the money, and she lost the money. So we think the hacker must have been in the network monitoring the emails, so it's really important that we check what access they have to make sure they haven't done other bad things as well. But essentially, the policy covers, if you get cybercrime, it covers the value of the funds. Often we find the first time you think you've been conned is not the first time. So one of the things we investigate is whether or not there were previous emails from the same hacker where you made funds but hadn't noticed. So the third thing is a hack. So it's not the most likely thing. I put this picture up because I think it's often difficult to imagine what a hacker looks like, and sometimes you might think it's a pimply 15-year-old working out of their bedroom. A lot of hackers now are more like international businessmen because what they steal, they pass on to other people to distribute. And so actually, this guy is called Albert Gonzalez. He was someone that stole. He worked for the FBI, and while he was working for the FBI, stole about 160 million credit cards off of a large American retailer. He looked a regular guy. There are about 200 of these very skillful hackers out there. They're all blokes. Don't know why that is, but this is very expensive. If you get hacked, if one of your insureds gets hacked, the investigation of a hack, when we see that it's been a real hack rather than just a missent email or something like that, we would normally put about £100,000 as a reserve just for the forensic investigation. Normally, forensic bills have to be paid within 48 hours, or at least an initial deposit. And so we pay the vendors, the insured doesn't pay the vendors, and so that is very, very hard. Even if you didn't get hacked but we needed to investigate, normally a forensic investigator would expect to be paid £5,000 just to come out at all. And again, that would be payable within 48 hours. The final thing about forensic investigators, which is really tough, is they've got so much work on. Even if you find someone and you have the money, they might just say they wouldn't work for you. Someone described it to me as the Queen's architect being asked to do a kitchen extension. A lot of themselves just won't make themselves available because they've got bigger fish to fry. So if you've had a hack, it's going to be probably in the region of £100,000. And there's a lot of investigation that has to go on. You'll need a lawyer to check what your obligations are as a result of a hack. So you might have NDAs, supplier contracts, website privacy statements. They'll trawl through all those contracts to work out what the obligations under their contracts are. And then you'll go into the second column of notification. And notification can range between £5 and £50 per individual. So you can see that all starts getting pretty expensive pretty quickly. A senior privacy lawyer might get paid £700 or £800 an hour. They're super expensive. Obviously, they have a team to do some lower level work, but it's very easy to rack up £25,000 on the legal side if you actually get a hack. If it's a smaller incident, then it can be, just a couple of £1,000s. But if it's a hack, it gets very high. If it's payment card data involved, then basically any of the previous forensic bills would probably be roughly doubled. So you think, in the context of buy a plan for £109, a get out of bed bill for forensics is £5,000. If you get hacked £100,000, there's a bit of a value proposition there where, even if you think that a hack might only happen to you, it's got a chance of 1 in 25 years, finding that amount of money once in 25 years is clearly a massive cash flow issue. I'll spend 5 minutes whizzing through 5 examples. These are all UK examples. A small school, they had a new IT system, email accounts to a dinner lady and a cleaning lady. The hacker got into their system, looked at email accounts that weren't used. That made them able to operate within the system without being spotted. In June, they got the mailing list of all the parents. They sent out porn to all of the parents up through the email system. It looked like the dinner lady was having a very strange time. Unfortunately, it wasn't found out until September when everyone came back to school. It meant that none of the computer logs to see who did what were available, and so the forensic bill was, it was more like £1 million than £100,000. This is a small school, and obviously the investigation was urgent. The we pay for the communication to the parents, the notification to the parents as well that their information has been stolen. Massive claim. You'd never guess that a small local school would attract that kind of attention, but it did, and they were mortified by it. Small IFA in Manchester, someone sent them an email, so we've hacked into your networks, and we've got all your client details, and unless you pay us money, we'll publish them on the internet. We started forensic investigating. It looked like the forensic bill was going to be about 50k. We couldn't find out what had happened, and then eventually we worked out that it was an employee who'd walked out with paper copies of all the clients, presumably disgruntled, and so we stopped the forensic bill at about 10k, and the employee was investigated, but even that was a 10k bill in a short period of time. And then this poor small foundry in Lancashire, they received an email with 3 viruses on it. One virus was a ransomware attack, and they clicked on it, unfortunately. The second was one of these banking emails which says, you've got a problem with your security, please supply your password. They were unlucky. It was all badged by Santander. That was their corporate account. That's a complete coincidence. They clicked on that, and so their bank accounts got compromised. And the third thing was it's an unusual virus, but basically it allowed them to take over control of the foundry itself. The foundry itself was actually in danger of exploding. This is a 5-employee foundry, 3 workers, 2 admin in Lancashire. And this proves it was not targeted. You know, it was malicious, but there was no way they went after a foundry. It was just someone unfortunately clicked on this email with all these viruses, and that's what triggered all these terrible events. Small utility, it was not a national utility, electricity supplier. Really bizarre this, but essentially they were targeted by China. So China seemed to be going around trying to get into small utilities and taking control of them, maybe for future use. But it all sounds very James Bond. It all sounds as if it should be something on Mission Impossible. But this happened to someone in the Midlands. And then the final one is a lawyer. The lawyer rang up saying, I've just sent an email with a virus to all my clients. I inadvertently clicked onto it. I don't know what to do. He couldn't think clearly. And so one of the things that's really useful about this, this service is you pick up the phone and you have someone deeply experienced with a very calm, objective view. And basically we said to him, hold on a minute, don't worry too much. What did the virus ask for? And actually the virus didn't ask for your bank account details. It didn't send another virus to kind of take control of your network. It was just abuse. And of course, abuse is embarrassing, but a lot of the time, that initial phone call can make people calm down and realize the implications aren't too bad. But when you're left to your own devices, that can be hard to work out. Most people that have some kind of cyber incident are either angry or very worried, neither of which are great frames of mind to sort things out. So picking up the phone to someone else can often be a much more helpful kind of way of progressing. Good companies have data breaches. The key is how you respond to them. This is the idea. You don't have any plan. You have a data breach. This is the process that you need to go through. We think this takes a minimum of 10 days, but probably more like 3 weeks to get vendors signed up and working. Obviously, 72 hours is the context under GDPR. And with this, if you buy a cyber policy with services attached to it, then you contact BBR services and they start working. So the 72-hour clock runs from the moment you pick up the phone. There's no claims forms. There's no minimum information in order to trigger it. It's an in-house call line you get through to Beazley employees. So there's no hidden costs which might go to your renewal premium next year. And so it is as easy as it can be. This is a side of it in more detail. I guess without labouring on the detail of it, the key about this slide is if you have to build this plan yourself, it is quite tricky to build. You need a lot of different parts to work well. You have IT guys speaking their language, lawyers speaking their own, media consultants handling communications speaking another language. The guys on our panel have worked together over 10,000 times, plus or minus, and so it's a well-oiled machine, and you get the benefit of their experience. We don't think anyone else has as much experience by any stretch as these guys do. So in a nutshell, why do we think it's valuable? We think it minimises disruption to your business, because if you don't have a plan, then you probably draw in staff whose job it isn't. They don't have experience or technical expertise or probably time to deal with this. So it keeps your staff doing their jobs. It stops the regulator getting interested in causing disruption. And probably most critically, it can maintain or even enhance your reputation to your customers, your suppliers. Your customers could be parents if you're a school. It could be, customers if they're like a caravan park or games park, or if you're a professional service supplier, it could be your clients. But all of these guys will be monitoring what happens, because you have to tell them what happens these days. And actually, they're typically pleasantly surprised. This process involves lots of very clear communication. It's all paid for and managed in-house, so it's not that the insurer pays and we reimburse them. We make all the payments, so it limits the cash flow issues. And in a nutshell, we think even though it's an insurance, it's really buying a service or buying a plan. It involves pre-breach services, so essentially if you buy one of these insurances, you get through to a risk portal, which gives you some very simple explanation of what you can do to improve your risk. And after you've had a breach and we've tried to contain it and get the best outcome, then we also try to help you improve your risk afterwards. So it's a classic triangle where there's pre-risk management, there's breach management, and then there's post-risk management, which normally small companies really value. And this is a slide of what the risk portal is that you automatically get access to if you buy the policy. Tiny little bit at the top, you see in the middle, there's the UK. This is a UK website, so it's not about US data breaches. So we're almost there. This is the last section, objections. So we hear a lot of reasons why people say they don't think cyber is relevant or useful to them. This is it in a nutshell. These are the normal ones that we hear. You might have heard some of these yourself. I'll just mention two of these in a little bit more detail. We can send through to you a one-pager on countering these objections. So we outsource our IT. So as I mentioned earlier, 12% of the problems that we handle originate from outsourcers, and you don't normally get a contract with an outsourcer, which if they do cause a problem, will make them financially responsible. And probably even more importantly, outsourcers are great value. They set up something which is cheap and scalable, really good value. They're not designed to set up a response to a crisis, such as a data breach. So they don't normally have the skills, the money, or the time to deal with a data breach. And so even if they did want to help, it may not be that they're in a good position to help. So a lot of the time we spend is trying to help outsourcers solve your problem for you. And so we end up cooperating with the outsourcers rather than the outsourcers do it themselves. And then more widely, outsourcers can solve problems, they can cause some problems, but this is a list of things which outsourcers cannot help at all with. So if you send an email with the wrong attachments or the attachments to the wrong person, then obviously an outsourcer isn't going to help with that. Those cyber crime or fraudulent transfer cases, they won't better help with. Loss of paper records or like that Manchester IFA who had a rogue employee. So an awful lot of cyber problems, the majority of them are probably not IT problems in our experience. And finally, even if you think your IT outsourcers should be responsible and they do give you a contract to help you out, it's probable that your suppliers, clients and customers will hold you responsible, so you'll want to be involved in it and you'll want to try to manage those relationships, and we can help you do that. And then the final slide is we aren't a target for hackers. So these are UK government stats, so they're not vendors, they're not insurers. The UK government surveyed SMEs in the UK, and their estimate was 55% of SMEs had experienced a data breach. And so it's very, very common for SMEs in the UK to suffer a data breach. And if they do, it's a little harder to hide now because they've got responsibilities to report it. Hackers know that, and so as time goes by, they target bigger companies less often. Most hackers prefer to take smaller companies because they know they'll have, quite understandably, less good security. They can't afford it. And as I mentioned earlier, these automated scripts, basically, they don't target you specifically. They just send out these scripts that scout for problems. And if they find a vulnerability, they won't know who you are, what country you're in, what you do. They'll find your vulnerability and then target you afterwards. So the fact that you're a small foundry in Lancashire does not prevent you from receiving a virus which you might click on. And then finally, just like the last slide, many incidents are not malicious. So you're not maliciously missending an email. You're not maliciously putting a bit of paper in recycling rather than shredding. And sometimes hackers will target your clients rather than you yourself. So it's never been easier for viruses to be sent out. It's never been easier to send out ransomware attacks. All of these attacks are increasing in frequency. And my guess, I don't know exactly, is an awful lot of those 55% of SMEs will be targeted will receive these viruses from hackers that have just sent out direct mailing lists, basically. So that's it. A quick whiz through to recap. There are 3 columns of cover: investigation, notification, and liability. Almost everything that we do is in the first 2 columns of coverage, and those 2 columns of coverage are a service made available to you. It's a plan. It's about non-digital as well as digital exposures, and we see an increase in how many incidents are affecting small SMEs, and we think that the GDPR notification requirement, 72 hours, suggests strongly that the best way that you can avoid your business being distracted by a data breach is to buy a plan, and it's possible that buying a plan for as little as £109 might be